The frozen river looked deceptively safe that January morning in 1884, its surface gleaming white under the weak winter sun, but Victoria Kane had no choice except to cross it if she wanted to reach Columbus, New Mexico before nightfall. She stepped onto the ice with her carpet bag clutched tight in one gloved hand, her boots making soft scraping sounds against the crystalline surface. The cold bit through her wool coat, but she pressed forward, thinking only of the teaching position that awaited her in the small frontier town just 3 miles ahead. Her father had died 6 months ago back in St. Louis, leaving her with nothing but debts and a letter of recommendation from the Methodist Church. This job was her salvation, her chance to build something of her own in a world that offered women precious few opportunities. The crack sounded like a gunshot splitting the winter silence. Victoria froze mid-step, her heart lurching into her throat as spiderweb fractures spread beneath her feet. She had misjudged the thickness, had been too desperate to reach her destination to consider that the January thaw might have weakened the ice near the center of the Rio Mimbres. Another crack echoed, louder this time, and she tried to step backward, but her boot broke through. Frigid water surged up to her knee, stealing her breath and her balance. She gasped and fell forward, and the entire section of ice gave way with a thunderous snap. The cold was beyond anything she had ever experienced. It seized her lungs, paralyzed her limbs, and dragged her down into darkness. Her heavy skirts became waterlogged anchors, pulling her deeper as she thrashed wildly. She managed to break the surface once, gulping air and screaming, but the current beneath the ice was stronger than she anticipated. Her fingers scraped against the jagged edge of the hole, found no purchase, and slipped away. The world became muffled and distant, reduced to the thundering of her own heartbeat and the burning in her chest as her body demanded air she could not provide. Then something looped around her shoulders, tightening under her arms with sudden force. She was being pulled, dragged upward through the terrible cold. Her head broke the surface, and she coughed violently, choking on water and air in equal measure. "I have got you. Just hold on. Do not fight it," a man's voice called out, rough with exertion. "Let me do the work." Victoria could not have fought if she wanted to. Her body had gone numb, her teeth chattering so hard she bit her tongue and tasted copper. She felt herself being hauled across the broken ice, heard it cracking and groaning beneath them, and then suddenly they were on solid ground, and she was collapsed in the frozen mud of the riverbank. Strong hands rolled her onto her side as she vomited up river water, her whole body shaking with violent tremors. "We need to get you warm right now or you will not make it," the voice said, closer now, urgent. "My camp is just over that ridge. Can you walk?" She tried to answer, but her jaw would not cooperate. Through blurred vision, she saw a man crouching beside her, young and weather-worn, with dark hair curling from beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were a striking gray blue, filled with concern and determination. He did not wait for her response. Instead, he scooped her up as if she weighed nothing and began striding up the embankment toward a stand of cottonwood trees. "My bag," she managed to gasp out. "Already got it," he said, and she realized he had somehow retrieved both her carpet bag and a coiled rope that must have been what saved her. "Name is Cole Dawson. You picked a hell of a day for ice skating." Despite everything, despite the cold that had invaded her very bones, she felt a bubble of hysterical laughter try to escape. "Victoria Kane," she chattered. "I was trying to reach Columbus." "Well, Miss Kane, you nearly reached the hereafter instead." His arms tightened around her as he navigated between the trees. "Just hold on a little longer." His camp materialized through her fading vision like a mirage. A sturdy canvas tent, a fire ring with embers still glowing, 2 horses tethered nearby watching their approach with mild interest. Cole kicked open the tent flap and carried her inside, laying her on a bedroll that smelled of leather and wood smoke. He immediately began stripping off her soaked coat, his movements quick and efficient but respectful. "I need to get these wet clothes off you or the cold will kill you just as sure as drowning would have," he said, not meeting her eyes. "I will turn my back, and you tell me when you are wrapped in these blankets, but you need to do it fast, Miss Kane, understand?" She nodded, her fingers fumbling uselessly at the buttons of her dress. They were too cold, too stiff, and the buttons might as well have been made of ice themselves. A sob of frustration escaped her throat. Cole glanced back, saw her struggle, and cursed softly. I am going to help with the buttons, that is all. And then I am turning right back around. This is about survival, nothing else. His fingers were warm and surprisingly gentle as they worked the buttons free down the front of her bodice. True to his word, as soon as the last button was undone, he spun away and busied himself building up the fire just outside the tent entrance. Victoria's frozen fingers fought with her remaining garments, finally managing to peel away the sodden layers of dress, petticoats, and undergarments. She wrapped herself in the blankets he had provided, thick wool that scratched against her skin but held the promise of warmth. I am covered, she said, her voice still shaking. Cole returned with stones he had been heating in the fire, wrapping them in the spare cloth before tucking them around her feet and against her sides. He poured something from a flask into a tin cup and held it to her lips. Whiskey. Drink it slow. The liquor burned down her throat, spreading heat through her chest. She coughed and sputtered, but he kept the cup tilted until she had swallowed several mouthfuls. Gradually, painfully, feeling began returning to her extremities in waves of pins and needles that made her gasp. That is good. That means you still have everything attached, Cole said, sitting back on his heels. He had removed his own coat and was in shirt sleeves despite the cold, having given her every blanket he owned. You gave me one hell of a scare, Miss Kane. I was checking my trap lines along the ridge when I heard the ice crack. By the time I got down there with my rope, you had already gone under. You saved my life, Victoria said, the reality of it hitting her fully for the first time. I would have died. Well, I could not very well let that happen, could I? He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. What were you doing crossing that river in January anyway? The bridge into Columbus is only a mile upstream. I did not know, she admitted, embarrassment flooding through her. I came in on the stage from Deming, and the driver let me off at what he said was the closest point to Columbus. He told me to head south and I would see the town. I saw the river and thought crossing it would be faster than following it to find a bridge. Cole shook his head slowly. That driver should be horsewhipped. Everyone around here knows the ice is not safe this time of year, not with the warm spell we have been having. He studied her face, his expression thoughtful. You are not from around here, are you? St. Louis, she said. I'm supposed to be the new school teacher in Columbus. I'm already 3 days late because the stage broke an axle outside Deming. Fresh worry seized her. What time is it? I need to reach the school board chairman before he gives the position to someone else. It is barely past 8 in the morning, and you are not going anywhere until you warm up proper, Cole said firmly. Besides, your clothes need to dry, and that will take a few hours at least. I will ride into Columbus once we have got you sorted and let them know you will be along tomorrow. Tomorrow. Panic rose in her chest. No, I cannot wait that long. They are expecting me today. Miss Kane, you nearly drowned and then froze to death in that order, Cole said, his voice patient but unyielding. Your lips are still blue and you are shaking like a leaf. If you try to ride into town today, you will catch pneumonia and be dead inside a week. Is that what you want? She closed her eyes, tears of frustration leaking from the corners. He was right. She knew he was right. But this job was everything. Without it, she would have to return to St. Louis and throw herself on the mercy of distant relatives who had made it clear they considered her father's debts a shameful burden. I have nowhere else to go, she whispered. Hey now, Cole said softly, and she felt his calloused hand cover hers through the blanket. It is going to be fine. I know Walter Morrison. He is the chairman of the school board. Good man, fair man. When I tell him what happened, he will understand. You have my word on that. Victoria opened her eyes and found him watching her with such genuine concern that something in her chest tightened. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me. Do I need a reason to help someone in trouble? He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Besides, Columbus needs a teacher badly. The last one quit 3 months ago after deciding frontier life was not for her. The children have been running wild ever since, driving their mothers half crazy. You getting that job is in everyone's best interest, including mine. Do you have children? She asked, suddenly curious about this man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer. No, I am not married, he said, something flickering across his face too quickly for her to identify. I have a cattle ranch about 5 miles from Columbus, nothing fancy, but it keeps me fed. I come out here every few weeks to check the trap lines I keep running, mostly for something to do during the slow season. He stood and reached for his coat. You rest now. I am going to string up a line to dry your clothes and make some coffee and breakfast. You hungry? As if in answer, her stomach growled loudly and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. Cole laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I will take that as a yes. I have got bacon and beans and biscuits from yesterday, nothing fancy, but it will fill you up. He ducked out of the tent, leaving her cocooned in blankets with heat slowly seeping back into her bones. She could hear him moving around outside, the clank of pans, the snap of wood being added to the fire, the low voice he used to speak to his horses. She studied her surroundings in the growing light. The tent was surprisingly well kept, his gear organized and clean. A rifle hung from the center pole, and she saw a leather saddlebag with books stacked inside it. One spine read The Count of Monte Cristo and another Leaves of Grass, a cowboy who read Whitman. She found herself smiling despite her situation. Her clothes appeared in the tent entrance, draped over what looked like a hastily constructed wooden frame that Cole must have built just for this purpose. He had positioned it near the brazier he had moved inside, the heated stones providing warmth without open flame. Steam rose from her dress and petticoats in gentle wisps. Thank you, she called out. Just doing what needs doing, so, came his reply. Coffee will be ready in a minute. True to his word, he soon returned with 2 tin cups of coffee so strong she could almost stand a spoon in it. He handed one to her, keeping his eyes averted as she sat up with the blanket clutched to her chest. She sipped carefully, feeling the warmth spread through her. I grew up in western Kansas, Cole said, settling himself just outside the tent entrance with his back to her, his own coffee steaming in the cold air. My father had a small farm, but the grasshoppers took everything in '74. I was 16 then. We lost the land and Pa died that winter, just gave up, I think. Ma followed him 6 months later, and it was just me and my sister left. I am sorry, Victoria said softly. I lost my mother when I was 12, and my father just this past summer. I understand what it is like to be alone. I am sorry for your losses too, he said, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. My sister married a shopkeeper in Topeka, which was a lucky thing for her. I headed south, worked cattle drives for a few years, saved every penny, bought my ranch 3 years ago with money I earned the hard way. It is not much yet, but it is mine, and it is growing. That is admirable, Victoria said. Building something from nothing, that takes courage. Or stupidity, depending on who you ask, Cole said with a soft laugh. Some days I'm not sure which it is, but I like it out here. The land is hard but honest. It does not lie to you about what it is. They fell into comfortable silence, drinking their coffee as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Victoria felt herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. There was something solid and reassuring about Cole Dawson. Something that made her feel safe, even though she was wrapped in blankets in a tent with a man she had met barely an hour ago. It should have felt scandalous, improper, but somehow it just felt right. Cole prepared breakfast with easy competence, bringing her a plate of bacon, beans, and biscuits that tasted like heaven after her ordeal. He ate his own breakfast outside the tent, maintaining a respectful distance that she found both frustrating and touching. When they had finished, he checked her clothes with a critical eye. Another hour or two and they should be dry enough, he said. You should try to sleep if you can. Your body has been through a shock and rest will help. I do not think I can sleep, Victoria protested, but even as she said it, exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. The warmth, the food, the terrible adrenaline crash from her near-death experience all conspired against her. Her eyes felt heavy as stones. "Just try," Cole said gently. "I will be right outside if you need anything." She did not remember deciding to lie down, but the next thing she knew, she was waking to afternoon light filtering through the tent canvas. Her clothes hung nearby, dry and neatly arranged. She could hear Cole whistling softly outside, a tune she did not recognize but found pleasant. Checking to make sure he was still occupied, she quickly dressed, her fingers fumbling with buttons that thankfully cooperated this time. The fabric was stiff from its river bath and smelled of wood smoke, but it was warm and dry, and she had never been more grateful for clothing in her life. "I am dressed," she called out, and Cole appeared in the tent opening almost immediately. "You look better," he observed. "Color is back in your face. How do you feel?" "Tired," she admitted, "and sore and embarrassed, but alive, thanks to you." "Well, alive is the important part," he said. "I have been thinking. It is too late to ride into Columbus today. The sun will be setting in a few hours, but my ranch is closer, about an hour ride from here. You could stay there tonight, in the spare room. It is not fancy, but it is warm and dry and has an actual bed. In the morning, I will take you into Columbus myself and explain to the school board what happened. Does that sound acceptable?" Victoria knew she should feel hesitant, should worry about propriety and reputation. An unmarried woman spending the night at a bachelor's ranch would be fodder for gossip in any town, especially a small frontier settlement like Columbus. But the alternative was spending the night in this tent, and Cole had already proven himself to be a gentleman despite circumstances that would have given a less honorable man opportunities to be otherwise. "That sounds more than acceptable," she said. "Thank you, Cole, for everything." His smile was like sunrise, warm and full of promise. "Then let us pack up and head out. The horses are rested and ready." She had not ridden a horse since childhood, and mounting proved to be an awkward affair that left her blushing and Cole trying heroically not to laugh. He settled her on his quieter mare, a sweet-tempered bay named Molly, while he took the larger gelding, a rangy buckskin he called Buck. They rode south through country that grew more beautiful with each mile, rolling grasslands punctuated by rocky outcroppings and the occasional stand of trees following a dry creek bed. Cole pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the area with the easy knowledge of someone who had made it his business to learn the land. He showed her where the antelope liked to graze in the early morning, where the best fishing holes could be found in the spring, which ranches belonged to friendly neighbors and which to more difficult folk. He spoke about Columbus, too, painting a picture of a town struggling to establish itself on the harsh frontier, but full of people who cared about building something lasting. "Walter Morrison runs the general store with his wife, Ruth," Cole explained as they crested a ridge, and she caught her first glimpse of his ranch in the valley below. "They have 4 children, all school age. Ruth has been beside herself trying to teach them at home while also managing the store. Then there is Doc Sutton and his daughter, Emily. She is about your age, I would guess. The Reverend and his wife just moved here last fall from Texas. Good people, all of them, but they can be a bit nosy." "I will be the subject of considerable gossip, won't I?" Victoria asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. "Showing up a day late with a cowboy, wearing clothes that clearly got soaked." "Probably," Cole admitted. "But I will set the story straight, and in a few weeks something else will happen that everyone will talk about instead. That is how small towns work. Just be yourself and do your job well, and they will come around." His ranch came into clearer view as they descended into the valley. It was modest, as he had said, but well-maintained. A small house built of adobe and wood with a covered porch, a barn that looked new, several corrals, and a windmill turning lazily in the breeze. She could see cattle grazing in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. "It is wonderful," Victoria said honestly. "You should be proud of what you have built here." "I am," Cole said simply. "It is not finished yet, not by a long shot, but it is mine, and it is home." He helped her dismount in the yard, his hands steady at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Their eyes met and held, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest, a recognition she was not quite ready to name. Then Buck snorted and stamped, breaking the moment, and Cole stepped back with what might have been a blush darkening his sun-weathered cheeks. The inside of the house was as tidy as his camp had been, if Spartan. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. 2 doors led to what she assumed were bedrooms. The furniture was simple but sturdy, handmade from the look of it. Books lined a shelf near the fireplace, and she noticed a violin case resting in one corner. "You play?" she asked, gesturing to the violin. "A little," he said, looking almost shy. "My mother taught me. I'm not very good, but it is nice to have music sometimes. The silence out here can get heavy, especially in winter." "I would love to hear you play sometime," Victoria said, and meant it. Cole showed her to the spare room, which held a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward distant mountains. He brought her carpet bag in and set it on the bed. "I will be just in the other room if you need anything," he said. "I'm going to tend to the horses and then make some supper. Beef stew sound good?" "It sounds perfect," she said. Alone in the small room, Victoria sat on the bed and let herself feel the full weight of the day. She had nearly died that morning. If not for Cole's quick thinking and courage, she would be at the bottom of the Rio Mimbres right now, another forgotten casualty of frontier life. Instead, she was here, safe and warm in the home of a man who had saved her life without expecting anything in return. A man who read poetry and played violin and built his dreams with his own 2 hands. A man whose gray-blue eyes made her forget to breathe. She unpacked her bag, hanging her spare dress and shaking out her undergarments. Everything she owned fit in that one small bag. The sum total of her life reduced to a few changes of clothes, a hairbrush, her mother's Bible, and the letters of recommendation that would hopefully secure her position as Columbus's school teacher. It was not much, but it was a start. A new life in a new place, and she was determined to make it work. The smell of cooking meat drew her out of the bedroom. Cole had changed into a clean shirt and combed his hair back, still damp from washing. He stirred a pot hanging over the fireplace, adding vegetables from a root cellar. The domestic scene struck her as both strange and utterly natural. "Can I help?" she asked. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked hopefully. "I am terrible at them. They always come out like rocks." "I can make biscuits," she confirmed, and he gestured toward the flour and lard with relief. They worked together in the small kitchen, moving around each other with surprising ease. Cole told her about his cattle, the dozen head he had started with that had grown to nearly 50. He talked about his plans to buy more land, to build a larger house someday, to maybe hire a hand or 2 if the ranch kept growing. She told him about teaching in St. Louis, the satisfaction of watching children's faces light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. She talked about her father's bookshop, now sold to pay his debts, and how she had spent her childhood surrounded by stories. "I always thought books were the most important thing in the world," she said, kneading the biscuit dough. "My father used to say that a person who can read can go anywhere, be anyone. That is what I want to give those children in Columbus. The key to all the worlds between the covers of books." "That is a fine thing to want," Cole said, and the admiration in his voice made her cheeks warm. "They are lucky to have you, even if they do not know it yet." They ate dinner at the small table, the stew rich and satisfying, her biscuits light and fluffy in a way that made Cole groan with pleasure and declare her a miracle worker. They talked long after the dishes were cleared, about books and music and the future they each hoped to build. Cole played his violin for her as darkness fell, and he had undersold his ability. The music was beautiful, melancholy and sweet, filling the small house with something that felt like magic. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Cole walked her to the spare room door and bid her good night with old-fashioned formality. But before she could close the door, he reached out and gently touched her arm. "Victoria," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I am really glad you are alive." "So am I," she whispered. "Good night, Cole." She dreamed that night of ice breaking beneath her feet, but in the dream Cole was always there pulling her to safety. his rope a lifeline connecting them across dark water. Morning came too soon and too late all at once. Cole made breakfast while she dressed carefully in her better dress, pinning her hair up with nervous fingers. Today she would meet the school board, would learn whether her position was still waiting or if her lateness had cost her everything. Today she would begin her new life in Columbus, and the thought filled her with equal parts excitement and terror. The ride into town took less than an hour. Cole kept his buckskin to an easy pace, staying close beside her as if afraid she might vanish if he looked away. They created a rise, and Columbus spread out below them, a collection of buildings clustered around a dusty main street. It was smaller than she had imagined, more raw and new, but she could see the bones of something that might someday be substantial. A church steeple rose above the other buildings, and she could see the schoolhouse at the edge of town, a simple structure but solid-looking. Cole led her straight to the general store, a two-story building that seemed to be the heart of the small community. Several people stopped to stare as they rode past, and Victoria felt the weight of curious eyes. Cole helped her dismount, his hands steady and reassuring at her waist, and she caught whispers from a group of women standing near the store entrance. "Let me do the talking at first, Cole murmured. "I will explain what happened." Walter Morrison proved to be a portly man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. His wife Ruth was smaller and rounder, with flour dusting her apron and warmth in her smile. Their store smelled of coffee and tobacco and new cloth, the familiar sense of civilization that made Victoria's heart clench with unexpected homesickness. "Cole Dawson," Walter said, shaking the cowboy's hand. "What brings you to town? And who is this young lady?" "This is Miss Victoria Kane," Cole said, "your new school teacher. She had a bit of trouble getting here." He told the story plainly and without embellishment, but Ruth Morrison's hands flew to her mouth when he described the ice breaking and Victoria's near drowning. By the time he finished explaining how she had spent the night at his ranch to recover, a small crowd had gathered to listen. "My goodness," Ruth breathed. "You poor dear. You must have been terrified." "I was," Victoria admitted, "but Cole saved my life. If he had not been there, if he had not acted so quickly, I would have drowned." "Well," Walter said, stroking his beard thoughtfully, "that is quite a tale. I am glad you are safe, Miss Kane, and I am relieved you made it to Columbus at all. We have been without a teacher for too long, and the situation was becoming desperate. When you did not arrive as expected, I confess I feared you had changed your mind." "Never," Victoria said firmly. "This position means everything to me, Mr. Morrison. I know I am late, but I am here now, and I am ready to begin as soon as you will have me." "The schoolhouse needs some cleaning. It has been sitting empty," Ruth said. "But if you are willing to start Monday, that would give you a few days to settle in and prepare. We have arranged for you to board with Widow Henderson. She has a nice room and will feed you dinner and breakfast. It is all included with your salary." Relief flooded through Victoria so intensely she felt dizzy. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you so much. You will not regret this, I promise." "I am sure we won't," Walter said warmly. "Now, Cole, since you brought Miss Kane in, perhaps you could escort her to Mrs. Henderson's house? It is the blue one on Elm Street, you know the place." "I know it," Cole said. "Come on, Victoria, let us get you settled." They led the horses down the dusty street, Victoria walking beside Cole in a daze of relief and exhaustion. People watched from windows and doorways, curious and cautious in the way of small town folk encountering a stranger. She held her head high and smiled at those brave enough to meet her eyes, determined to make a good impression despite the less than ideal circumstances of her arrival. Mrs. Henderson was a spy woman in her 60s, with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Victoria up and down, then did the same to Cole, and something knowing passed across her face. "So you are the teacher," she said. "Heard you had some excitement on the way here." "News travels fast," Cole observed dryly. "Small town, young man, small town." Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Come in, Miss Kane. Your room is upstairs, second door on the left. It is not much, but it is clean and warm. Supper is at 6, breakfast at 7. I do not hold with late sleeping or laziness." "That suits me perfectly," Victoria assured her. "Thank you for taking me in, Mrs. Henderson." Cole carried her bag upstairs and set it in the tidy room that would be her new home. It held a bed larger than the one at his ranch, a wardrobe, a desk and chair, and a window with lace curtains that looked out over the street. It was more than adequate, more than she had hoped for. "Will you be all right?" Cole asked, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "I will be fine," she said. "Thanks to you, I have a job, a place to live, and a future. I owe you everything, Cole." "You do not owe me anything," he said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." "That is not true, and you know it," she said, moving closer to him. "You saved my life and asked nothing in return. You gave me shelter and treated me with respect and kindness. You rode with me this morning and vouched for me to the school board. That is not what just anyone would do. That is what a good man does." Color rose in his cheeks again, that endearing blush that made him look younger than his years. "I just want you to be happy here," he said. "Columbus can be a good place if you give it a chance." "Will I see you again?" The question escaped before she could think better of it. Too raw and too honest, but she needed to know. "I come to town most Saturdays for supplies," Cole said, and the hope in his eyes matched what she felt blooming in her own chest. "That is tomorrow, actually. I could stop by if you would like. Show you around town properly, introduce you to more folks." "I would like that very much," Victoria said, smiling. He smiled back, and for a moment they simply stood there, something unspoken but powerful passing between them. Then Mrs. Henderson's voice called from downstairs, breaking the spell, and Cole stepped back into the hallway. "Tomorrow, then," he said. "Around 10? "I will be ready," she promised. She watched from her window as he rode away, sitting tall in his saddle, and felt her heart beating in a rhythm she did not quite recognize. She had come to Columbus to start over, to build a new life from the ashes of her old one. She had not expected to feel this pull toward someone, this connection that felt like recognition, like coming home to a place she had never been. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold. Victoria dressed in her best dress, the dark blue wool that had survived the river with minimal damage, and pinned her hair up carefully. She was waiting on the porch when Cole rode up at exactly 10 o'clock, and the smile that broke across his face when he saw her made her stomach flip in a way that was both alarming and wonderful. "You look lovely," he said, dismounting and offering her his arm. "You look rather handsome yourself," she replied, and enjoyed watching him blush. He walked her through Columbus, introducing her to everyone they met. Doc Sutton was a gruff man with gentle hands who made her promise to come to him immediately if she felt any ill effects from her ordeal. His daughter Emily was indeed close to Victoria's age, 23 to Victoria's 24, and she immediately invited Victoria to the church social the following weekend. The Reverend and his wife were warm and welcoming, assuring her that the church would support the school in any way needed. The saloon keeper, a surprisingly cultured man from Boston, promised to keep his establishment quiet during school hours. The blacksmith's wife, pregnant with her third child, nearly wept with relief that her two sons would finally have a proper teacher again. By the time they returned to Mrs. Henderson's for lunch, Victoria's head was spinning with names and faces, but her heart felt lighter than it had in months. These people were kind. They were hopeful. They wanted her here. Cole joined her for lunch at Mrs. Henderson's insistence, and the older woman plied them with pot roast and questions that were only slightly veiled attempts to determine the nature of their relationship. Cole handled it with good humor, neither confirming nor denying anything, simply stating facts and letting Mrs. Henderson draw her own conclusions. After lunch, they walked to the schoolhouse. It was a simple building, unpainted wood with a small bell tower and rows of windows that would let in good light. Inside, dust covered the desks and the blackboard, but the structure was sound. Victoria walked between the rows of desks, imagining them filled with children eager to learn. "I will come by Monday morning to help you clean before school starts," Cole offered. "I am not much use at teaching, but I can sweep and wash windows well enough." "You do not have to do that," Victoria protested. "You have a ranch to run." "The ranch can spare me for a morning," he said. "Besides, I want to help." She turned to face him, standing in the dusty schoolhouse with afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why are you being so good to me, Cole?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes searching her face. "Because from the moment I pulled you out of that river, frozen and half drowned, but fighting so hard to live, I could not stop thinking about you," he said finally. "Because you are brave and smart and you make me laugh. Because when I am with you, my ranch does not feel so empty and the silence does not weigh so heavy." He took a step closer. "Because I think maybe I started falling for you somewhere between the riverbank and here, and I do not want to waste time pretending I did not." Victoria's breath caught in her throat. In St. Louis, such a confession would have been scandalous, impossibly forward. But this was the frontier, where life was harder and shorter, and people could not afford to waste time on elaborate courtship rituals. Here, honesty was currency and directness was valued. "I have been thinking about you too," she admitted. "I know it is too soon. I know we barely know each other, but there is something between us, Cole. I felt it from the beginning." "Then let us see where it goes," he said, reaching for her hand. His calloused palm was warm against hers, solid and real. No promises, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing what might be possible. "I would like that," Victoria whispered. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart race. "Then it is settled. I will court you properly, Miss Kane. With flowers and Sunday dinners and walks after church, we will do this right." "Flowers might be difficult in January," she pointed out, smiling. "Then I will find something else," he promised. "I am a resourceful man." Monday morning, Cole arrived at the schoolhouse at dawn with cleaning supplies and a determined expression. They worked side by side for hours, sweeping out dust and dead insects, washing windows until they gleamed, scrubbing desks and organizing the few books the school possessed. By the time the first children began arriving, shy and curious, the schoolhouse looked welcoming. Victoria had 15 students ranging from 6 to 14, and they watched her with varying degrees of suspicion and hope. She introduced herself and asked each of them to tell her their names and what they hoped to learn. The responses ranged from a tiny girl's whispered "reading" to a teenage boy's defiant "nothing." Cole had slipped out before the children arrived, but Victoria carried the warmth of his presence with her through that first challenging day. When the final student left at 3 o'clock, she slumped into her chair behind the desk and let exhaustion claim her. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came from honest work and purpose. A knock at the door made her look up. Cole stood in the entrance, holding a bunch of dried wildflowers tied with string. "I know they are not fresh," he said, "but I remembered seeing them in my barn loft last fall. I thought they were pretty, so I hung them up to dry. Figured they were better than nothing." Victoria laughed, the sound startling birds from the schoolhouse roof. "They are perfect," she said, taking the bouquet and breathing in the faint scent of summer sun and grass. "How was your day?" "Boring compared to yours, I would guess," he said. "I fixed a fence and checked on the herd. How was your first day teaching Columbus's youth?" "Challenging," she admitted, "but good. I think we will do well together once they decide to trust me." "They will," Cole assured her. "Give them time." He walked her back to Mrs. Henderson's, carrying her bag of books and papers, and they talked about nothing and everything. It became a routine over the following weeks. Cole would appear at the schoolhouse most afternoons, waiting patiently until her students left before walking her home. On Saturdays, he would take her exploring the countryside around Columbus, showing her the harsh beauty of the desert landscape. On Sundays, they would sit together in church, close but not quite touching, aware of the entire town watching their developing romance with interest. Victoria threw herself into teaching with single-minded determination. Her students slowly warmed to her, especially after she started bringing in books from Cole's personal collection to supplement the school's meager library. She discovered that the defiant teenage boy, Samuel, was actually brilliant at mathematics but ashamed of his poor reading skills. She worked with him privately after school and watched his hostility melt into grudging respect and then genuine enthusiasm. The tiny girl who had whispered reading was named Grace, and she soaked up knowledge like desert soil absorbing rain. The Morrison children were energetic and curious. A pair of brothers from a ranch outside town were pranksters but good-hearted. She learned each of their stories, their struggles and triumphs, and felt her heart expanding to hold them all. Cole's courtship was steady and patient, the kind of romance built on friendship and respect. He brought her small gifts, not expensive, but thoughtful. A smooth stone from his favorite fishing spot, a perfectly preserved bird's nest, a book of poems he thought she would enjoy. They talked for hours about their pasts and their dreams for the future, about philosophy and politics and whether the transcontinental railroad was ultimately good or bad for the West. He kissed her for the first time in late February, under a cottonwood tree by the river where she had nearly died. They had ridden out to see the place in daylight, and she had been surprised to find it beautiful rather than frightening. Cole had spread a blanket on the bank and unpacked a picnic lunch Mrs. Henderson had prepared with many knowing looks. "I wanted to replace the bad memory with a good one," he explained as they ate. "You have already done that," Victoria said. "Every day with you is a good memory." He had looked at her then with such intensity that her breath stopped. "Victoria, I need you to know that this is not casual for me. What I feel for you, it is real, and it is deep, and it is not going away." "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too, Cole. I think I have loved you since you pulled me from the river." "I think I loved you in that moment too," he said, "when you looked up at me half frozen but so fierce, so determined to survive. I knew right then that you were special." He cupped her face in his hands, calloused palms rough against her cheeks, and kissed her softly. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Victoria felt like she had been remade, transformed into someone new and better than she had been before. "Marry me," Cole said, the words spilling out as if he could not contain them. "I know it is soon, I know people will talk, but I do not care. Marry me, Victoria. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course I will marry you." They married in April, in the small church in Columbus, with what seemed like the entire town crammed inside. Victoria wore a simple cream-colored dress that Ruth Morrison had helped her sew, and carried wildflowers that Cole had ridden 20 miles to find. Emily stood up as her bridesmaid, and Walter Morrison served as Cole's best man. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, and when the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such joy that everyone in attendance applauded. The reception was held at the schoolhouse, which the community had decorated with ribbons and flowers. There was dancing and music, with Cole playing his violin while others took their turn on the makeshift dance floor. Mrs. Henderson cried openly, declaring it the most romantic thing she had ever seen. Doc Sutton gave a rambling toast about the healing power of love. The children from Victoria's class presented her with a handmade quilt, each square embroidered with their names. As the sun set and they prepared to leave for Cole's ranch, their ranch now, Victoria looked around at the faces of these people who had become her family in such a short time. She thought about the terrified woman who had stepped onto the ice less than 4 months ago, running from grief and debt toward an uncertain future. That woman felt like a stranger now. This Victoria, the one wearing a wedding ring and standing beside the man she loved, was someone new, someone who had been forged in ice and fire and had emerged stronger for it. The ranch house had been transformed in her absence. Cole had spent weeks preparing, adding a room to make more space, building new furniture, hanging curtains she had sewn. It was simple, but it was theirs, a home they would build together. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and sweet, full of whispered promises and gentle discoveries. Cole treated her like something precious, and she gave herself to him without reservation, trusting him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Victoria traced the scar on his shoulder from a long-ago accident with a bull. "Are you happy?" Cole asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. "When I stepped onto that ice, I thought I was moving toward my future. I had no idea my future was actually standing on the riverbank with a rope." He pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "I was checking trap lines," he said. "If I had decided to go the next day instead, or even an hour later, I would not have been there. You would have died, and I never would have known what I missed." "But you were there," she said firmly. "That is what matters. You were there and you saved me, and now we are here together. That is not luck, Cole. That is fate." She continued teaching through the spring and into summer, though she had to give up the position in September when her expanding belly made the daily walk into town too difficult. She was pregnant with their first child, a fact that filled her with equal parts terror and wonder. Cole was overjoyed, already planning additions to the house and talking about teaching his son or daughter to ride. The baby arrived in January, exactly 1 year after Victoria had fallen through the ice. Labor was long and difficult, but Doc Sutton and Mrs. Henderson saw her through it, and Cole held her hand the entire time, refusing to leave despite tradition dictating that births were women's business. When the baby finally came, tiny and red-faced and howling, Victoria wept with relief and joy. "A boy," Doc Sutton announced, placing the squirming bundle in her arms, "healthy and strong just like his parents." They named him James, after Cole's father. He had his father's gray-blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he owned their hearts completely from his first breath. Cole proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with James when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow soothed their son when nothing else would. Victoria discovered that she loved ranch life, loved the hard work and the connection to the land. She kept a garden that flourished under her determined care, put up preserves for winter, learned to shoot a rifle well enough to protect the chickens from coyotes. She still read constantly, still taught James his letters as soon as he was old enough to show interest. The new school teacher in Columbus, a stern man from Ohio, would sometimes send students out to the ranch for extra tutoring, and Victoria would spend afternoons working with them at her kitchen table. 2 years after James was born, a daughter arrived. They named her Margaret, after Victoria's mother. She was a quiet baby, watchful and serious. With Cole's smile and Victoria's determination, James adored his little sister, appointing himself her protector and constant companion. The ranch grew steadily. Cole hired 2 hands, young men looking to learn the cattle business, and built a bunkhouse for them. The herd expanded to over 200 head. They added pigs and more chickens, and Cole talked about maybe trying some sheep. Money was always tight, but they had enough. And what they had earned together. On their 5th anniversary, Cole took Victoria back to the place where they had met. The river was frozen again, though not enough to walk on, and the cottonwood trees stood bare against the winter sky. They bundled the children in warm coats and blankets, James asking endless questions about why they were visiting a frozen river. Margaret quiet but observant as always. "This is where I met your mother," Cole told James, crouching down to the boy's level. "Right here. She fell through the ice and I pulled her out with a rope. If that had not happened, you would not be here. Neither would your sister. That is how important this place is." "You saved Mama?" James asked, his eyes wide. "I did," Cole confirmed. "It was the best thing I ever did because it brought her into my life." "And then you fell in love," Margaret piped up, her small voice serious. "And then we fell in love," Victoria agreed, reaching for Cole's hand. "Very, very much in love." They stood together on the bank, a family forged from chance and choice, and watched the winter sun set over the frozen river. Victoria thought about the woman she had been, desperate and alone, stepping onto ice that could not hold her weight. She thought about the water closing over her head, the certainty of death, and then the miracle of Cole's rope pulling her back to life. She had come west looking for a teaching position, for a way to survive. She had found so much more. She had found home and family and a love deeper than she had known existed. She had found purpose and partnership and joy in the everyday work of building a life with someone who saw her as an equal. She had found herself, the woman she was always meant to become. "What are you thinking about, Cole asked, squeezing her hand. "That I would fall through that ice 1,000 times if it meant ending up here with you," she said. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her while the children played at their feet, and she felt the truth of her own words settle into her bones. This life, hard and uncertain as it sometimes was hers. She had earned it with courage and determination, and she would defend it with everything she had. Years passed, measured in seasons and harvests, in cattle sales and new babies. Victoria gave birth to 2 more children, another boy they named Thomas and a girl they called Sarah. The ranch house expanded again and again to hold their growing family. James grew tall and strong, learning the ranch business at his father's side. Margaret revealed a gift for numbers and began keeping the ranch accounts at age 12. Thomas inherited his father's musical ability and his mother's love of books. Sarah was fearless and wild, always covered in dirt and bruises from climbing trees and chasing cattle. Cole's hair began to gray at the temples, and Victoria found laugh lines appearing around her eyes. They wore these marks of time with pride, evidence of a life fully lived. The ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. They hired more hands, built better facilities, earned respect throughout the region for fair dealing and quality stock. Victoria never returned to teaching formally, but she became known throughout the territory as someone who would tutor any child who needed extra help, regardless of their family's ability to pay. Her kitchen table saw dozens of students over the years, from ranch children struggling with reading to town kids who needed help with mathematics. She called it her investment in the future, and Cole supported her completely, knowing that teaching was as much a part of her as ranching was a part of him. On their 25th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. It seemed like half the territory showed up, including Ruth and Walter Morrison, now elderly but still sharp as tacks. Emily came with her husband and 3 children. Doc Sutton had passed on, but his daughter attended in his honor. Mrs. Henderson was long gone, but the new widow in town, Mrs. Fletcher, came and declared Victoria and Cole's romance the most inspiring thing she had ever heard. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Cole found Victoria on the porch, watching their grandchildren, James and Margaret's children, play in the yard. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up teaching in town, tying yourself to this ranch and to me?" Victoria turned in his arms, cupping his weathered face in her hands. 25 years had not dimmed what she felt for him, had only deepened and strengthened it, the way a river carves a canyon through stone. "Not once," she said firmly. "Cole, you gave me more than my life when you pulled me from that river. You gave me purpose and partnership and a family I never dreamed I could have. You gave me yourself, every day for 25 years, and that is more than I ever hoped for when I stepped onto that ice." "You gave me just as much," he said, his gray-blue eyes still so beautiful to her, shining with emotion. "Before you, this ranch was just a place I worked. You made it a home. You made me whole." They kissed as the sun set, surrounded by the life they had built together, and Victoria felt the same certainty she had felt on her wedding day. This was her fate, her destiny, the future that had been waiting for her beneath the ice of a frozen river. She had drowned in that water in a way. The frightened girl she had been had died there, and the woman Cole had pulled to safety had been born in that moment, ready to live fully and love completely. Their later years were peaceful, watching their children build lives of their own, welcoming grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown. Margaret opened a school in Columbus, fulfilling her mother's legacy. Thomas became a music teacher, traveling the territory giving lessons. Sarah, true to her wild nature, married a surveyor and spent her life exploring the Western territories. Victoria died at 73, peacefully in her sleep with Cole holding her hand. He followed her 6 months later, unable to exist for long without the woman who had been his partner for nearly 50 years. They were buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, under cottonwood trees that Cole had planted decades earlier. Their headstone was simple, bearing their names and dates, and one line that James had insisted on adding: "She fell through the ice, he threw her a rope, and they built a life together." The story became local legend, told and retold until it took on the quality of myth. The frozen river, the cowboy with his rope, the woman who nearly drowned but survived to build an empire of family and love. Parents told it to children as a story about courage and quick thinking. Romantics told it as proof that true love could strike in the most unlikely moments. Teachers told it to show that one person's brave action could change the course of multiple lives. But for those who had known Victoria and Cole personally, who had watched their marriage unfold over decades, the story was simpler and more profound. It was about two people who had found each other in the moment they were most needed, who had chosen each other every day after that first dramatic meeting, who had built something beautiful and lasting from a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. It was a love story, pure and simple, played out against the harsh beauty of the Western frontier. It was about second chances and new beginnings, about the courage to step onto uncertain ice and the grace to accept help when it was offered. It was about a woman who came west looking to teach and ended up learning the most important lessons from the man who saved her life. And it was about a rope thrown across dark water by strong hands, connecting two souls who were always meant to find each other, even if it took a frozen river and a moment of desperate peril to bring them together. That rope, preserved and framed, hung in the ranch house for generations, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes when we least expect it, from people we have not yet met, and that the worst moments of our lives can become the doorway to our greatest joys. The end came not with drama, but with peace, a life fully lived and a love fully expressed. And if ghosts walk the earth, then surely on cold January mornings you can still see them by the river, a cowboy with a rope and a woman in a wet dress falling in love all over again in the place where it all began.